At the Radiance's headquarters, Miranda was by Dalton's bedside. When he finally woke up, the two were overjoyed to be reunited and see each other alive. Suddenly, Dalton wondered where he was after remembering that he'd previously been saved by someone at the Williams family mansion just before falling unconscious. "It was Kevin who saved you from the Williams family. I don't know what this place is either, but I saw the flag of the Radiance displayed outside the building," Miranda briefly explained. "Kevin also arranged for someone to bring your grandfather over here."
"The Radiance?"
Dalton repeated the name in shock. Ever since he was captured by the Williams family, he'd heard many members of the Union mention that organization. It seemed like they'd become a dark horse that had suddenly risen to prominence among the great powers.
"Since when did Kevin get involved with the Radiance?"
Dalton asked reflexively, feeling puzzled. However, he was still touched. It was Kevin who had saved him once again. At this moment, the door of the room was slowly pushed open. A man in a black jacket quickly walked towards them. He respectfully lowered his head as he greeted Dalton.
"Mr. Steele, you're finally awake. My name is Spencer and I'm from the Radiance. Mr. Williams has already told me to take good care of you. You can rest assured that there will be no danger here at all." "Thank you," Dalton nodded understandingly. "Is Kevin here? I want to see him." "I'm sorry, Mr. Steele. I'm afraid Mr. Williams won't be able to come back here for a while as he's currently busy in St. Louis. But if you need anything, just let me know. I'll immediately call him to report on your situation," Spencer reassured him. In the hall of the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, Kevin and Nadia Alexander's conversation had become very tense. Suddenly, both of their phones rang at almost the same time. With that, Nadia apologetically stood up and stepped out into the courtyard. "What happened, Spencer?" Kevin asked in a puzzled manner as he picked up the phone. He knew that Spencer wouldn't have called him for something trivial. Mr. Williams, Mr. Steele is awake," Spencer reported respectfully. He almost slipped and called him Chancellor in front of Dalton. "Dalton is already woken up? Give the phone to him." A smile immediately appeared on Kevin's face. "Kevin, where are you? I want to see you." Dalton's clear and pleasant voice sounded through the line. Kevin briefly explained, "I'm in St. Louis. I'm sorry, Dalton. If it wasn't for me, Renee Silver wouldn't have come looking for you and—" "What are you apologizing for? We're brothers, right? Besides, I'm not dead yet, am I?" Dalton interrupted him. "Just stay at the place I've arranged for you and work on your recovery. If you need anything, just tell me. I'll come back to see you after I finish my work here in St. Louis." Although Kevin didn't dwell on the matter, his heart was still filled with guilt. "All right. Then I'll stay here and enjoy myself with good food and drinks. You have to come back as soon as possible," Dalton said with a loud laugh. The two of them talked for a while longer before Kevin ended the call. Just then, Nadia returned to the hall with a sad look on her face. Her eyes were empty and she didn't dare to look at Kevin. "What's wrong?" Kevin had already realized that something had happened. "I have 2 pieces of bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" Nadia sighed as she lowered her head slightly. "Will my choice make any difference?" Kevin frowned even more tightly. After struggling to speak for a while, Nadia let out a long breath and said, "Both of these things happened in Chicago. First, 3 families were suddenly eliminated, and one of them was the Jones family. Aside from that, the Herbalist Society's secret hideout was infiltrated and blown up. The junior members I left behind to watch over Lily and Phoebe were all dead, while our surveillance video showed that someone had taken the 2 of them away." When these words came out of Nadia's mouth, the hall became silent. Suddenly, an extremely powerful energy emitted from Kevin's body, and Nadia couldn't help but shudder upon seeing this. A second later, Kevin smashed the table in front of him without any warning. Completely releasing all his anger with one strike, it was like watching a ferocious beast unleashing its monstrous fury in human form. The terrifying pressure had engulfed the entire hall in an instant. And as Nadia hurriedly took a few steps back and almost fell to the ground, she stared at Kevin in fear. She never thought that he would be so powerful. "Who was behind this? Do you know who did it?" Kevin roared.
"We don't know yet. My men are already investigating." Nadia seemed to be at a loss for words. She only felt that facing Kevin at this moment was like an ant going up against an entire mountain. They weren't on the same level at all. "Nadia, tell me everything you know." Kevin's eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared coldly at her. Nadia was afraid that if she spoke one wrong word, Kevin would definitely take out his anger on her and kill her on the spot. "Kevin, calm down. My people should have news soon," Nadia quickly replied. Kevin stared at her fiercely as he thought about what to do next. Then he took out his phone and called Mitchell Cook's number.
"What do you need, Kevin?"
Cook quickly answered the phone. "3 things. Go and find out who got rid of the Jones family. Tell me who attacked the secret hideout of the Herbalist Society. And most importantly, find Lily and Phoebe." Kevin didn't say anything unnecessary. "If your people can't find anything in 2 hours, immediately issue a reward. Whoever can provide reliable information will be rewarded with 2 power pills." Mitchell Cook's pupils suddenly widened when he heard that. 1 power pill was already worth billions, which meant that this was equivalent to Kevin throwing out a reward of more than $10 billion.
"I'll do it right away."
Cook didn't dare to delay any longer. Immediately after that, Kevin called Spencer and told him to send 2,000 Radiance members to Chicago as soon as possible. Even if he had to dig 3 feet deep just to find Lily and Phoebe, he would exhaust all efforts to do so. In addition, he asked Spencer to guard the Radiance's headquarters while instructing the 5 Hill siblings to immediately lead 8,000 men to St. Louis. Kevin couldn't wait any longer for Herman Thompson and the other families to come to an agreement. He wanted to deal with whoever had taken over Blade Mountain while Lily and Phoebe's whereabouts were being found, so that he could soon lay the foundation for the Radiance to move into St. Louis. Nadia looked at him in shock. She'd previously been worried that Kevin would join the Radiance. However, judging from his orders, it seemed that Kevin was already one of the higher-ups of the organization. "Kevin, Mr. Williams, your relationship with the Radiance." Nadia didn't finish her sentence. "There are some things that wouldn't be beneficial to you if you know too much," Kevin said sternly. "But for now, I'll give you 2 choices. First, you can join the Radiance and ask your men to make up for your mistakes. Second, get out of the Swinton family's mansion immediately and don't ever appear in front of me again." Being put on the spot all of a sudden, Nadia still wasn't sure. You should know how much I care about my wife's safety. This matter all started because of you, so don't tell me my request is too much," Kevin interrupted her. "But I can assure you that after you join the Radiance, you'll get a lot more benefits than you could have ever seen in the Herbalist Society." "All right, let's do this." Nadia nodded her head without any hesitation. In fact, after many years of living in fear of the chairman, she felt very glad about her determination today in choosing to follow Kevin. It felt like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. In just a few minutes, because of Kevin's phone calls to deploy his men in Chicago, Detroit, and St. Louis, the 3 major cities became restless. Originally, Grandpa Thompson and the others had already reached a consensus, but they suddenly received news that a larger number of the Radiance's members were on their way to St. Louis. "Why did the Radiance come so quickly? We haven't even informed them yet," one of them cried in shock.
"Could it be that the Radiance already had a plan to take over St. Louis?"
Another one of them feared. Many influential leaders in St. Louis immediately began to panic. Meanwhile, Richard Swinton and Virgil Huxley were deep in thought. Just as Grandpa Thompson was about to say something, Joseph Thompson suddenly rushed in. He looked around before whispering something in his father's ear. "What? Where is he?" Grandpa Thompson suddenly stood up from his chair.
"He's at our mansion,"
Joseph Thompson nervously replied. "Richard, Virgil, you 2 calm them down first. I have to head back home right now." After saying this, Herman Thompson walked out in alarm and anger. If not for Joseph Thompson's support, he would have almost fallen to the ground. This shocked both Richard Swinton and Virgil Huxley. What was wrong?
Herman Thompson was known to be the most unshakable man in the Midwest, so why would he panic all of a sudden? In the Williams family mansion in New York, a woman in a light blue dress was sitting quietly on a chair. All the members of the Williams family were staring at her. This woman was extremely beautiful, especially her extraordinary temperament, and every single move she made attracted everyone's attention. It was definitely something that most women couldn't pull off. However, as Laura Williams looked at her, her eyes were filled with jealousy. How could she be so stunning? Thomas had opened his mouth a few times, but he couldn't say a word. He felt that talking to this mesmerizing woman in front of him would be an insult to her. At this moment, a large group of women rushed in from outside the door. They were the members of the union who had been living in the Williams family's mansion for some time. "Greetings, Enchantress." All the members of the union immediately knelt on the ground respectfully and lowered their heads to the woman who was sitting on the chair. Director Renee Silver greeted her in excitement. "Enchantress, what brings you here to New York?" This woman was Vivian Myers, the Enchantress of the Union. As the previous director, she had been in charge of all the matters of the organization for many years, and her energy base was unfathomable. "The Union's headquarters has received your report, and the Grand Empress has sent me here to help you," Vivian Myers said indifferently. While Renee served as the Union's public figurehead and oversaw its day-to-day affairs, she still had to answer to both the Enchantress, who had decades of wisdom and experience at her current position, as well as the Grand Empress, who was the organization's true leader behind the scenes. "The Grand Empress has finally come out of seclusion. That's great." Renee hurriedly introduced everyone. "Enchantress, this is the current patriarch of the Williams family, Thomas Williams. Many of our members are currently training in the Williams family's business." Renee then turned to Thomas. "Thomas, this is Vivian Myers, the Union's Enchantress. With her help, we'll definitely be able to kill that thief Kevin." Thomas quickly stood up and lowered his head in greeting. "Greetings, Enchantress Myers." "Mr. Williams, there's no need to be so polite. Just call me Vivian." She waved her hand casually. Suddenly, a bitter voice rang out. "Renee, did you say that this woman could kill Kevin? Is she really that powerful?" Laura Williams sneered at her with disdain. "Even though Kevin is a loser, he doesn't fall easily for someone's beauty. If her skills aren't good enough, then it would be a shame if a pretty woman like her gets beaten to death by that piece of trash." The members of the union all looked at Laura with dissatisfaction when they heard this. The two female members standing behind her even took a step forward. However, just as they were about to attack, Renee stopped them. At that moment, Renee's face also revealed an awkward expression. What was Laura thinking? Vivian Myers was above everyone else in the place. Even Jeffrey Bowie and the other leaders of the top 9 schools had to be polite when they saw her. When has she ever been looked down upon? "Shut up, Laura. Why are you talking nonsense?" Thomas turned around and scolded her harshly. "I'm just thinking about her life. She's too beautiful to die. Don't tell me I'm wrong." Laura Williams raised her head and looked at Vivian straight in the eye. Actually, she wanted to kick her out of their mansion immediately. In the Williams family mansion in New York, Enchantress Vivian Myers had been sent by the Union's Grand Empress to help Director Renee Silver in her plan to kill Kevin. However, despite the fact that Vivian Myers was the previous director, Laura, you have no idea. The Enchantress has a very high energy base. She'll definitely be able to get rid of Kevin for the Williams family. Renee Silver tried to smooth things over with a smile. Before Laura Williams could speak, Vivian Myers explained, "I'm not doing this for anyone. It's just that many of the union's members have been bothering the Williams family for quite some time now. So in order to return the favor,
I'll help you get rid of your problem." "How can you return this favor? Even Kelly and Ariana couldn't do anything to Kevin. And no offense, but with Renee already leading the way to find him, I think your strength is at most equal to hers." Laura Williams crossed her arms in front of her chest and replied scornfully,
"Enough. If you say one more word, I'll have you sent out of here immediately."
Thomas Williams couldn't hold it in anymore. He then turned around and walked towards Vivian. He lowered his head and said apologetically,
"I'm sorry if my wife offended you, Vivian. She doesn't know any better."
"No need to apologize, Thomas." Vivian looked over at Laura. "You should be glad that you have a discerning man as your husband. But if you say one more word to insult me, your blood will definitely splatter on the ground today." As soon as she finished speaking, a mountain-like pressure emanated from Vivian's body. When Thomas felt her immense power, he immediately took more than 10 steps back in fear. This made him crash into the table and fall to his knees. Upon seeing this, all of the union's members' faces turned pale with fright. They didn't even have the strength to raise their heads while kneeling on the ground. It was only at this moment that Laura Williams' eyes revealed just how fearful she was. She no longer doubted what Vivian had just said. In the study at the Thompson family mansion, Herman Thompson looked at the two men in front of him with a serious expression. Joseph Thompson slightly lowered his head. These two men were special representatives sent by the federal government. He could sense they weren't up to any good.
"Grandpa Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you on such short notice," one of the men said slowly. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Terrence Price, and this is my partner, Stanley Cooper."
"I don't think the two of you came here just to see an old man like me, am I right?" Herman Thompson asked them fearlessly.
"Grandpa Thompson, relax. We were ordered by our superiors to find Kevin Williams, and since we heard that he's currently in St. Louis, we came to visit you,"
Terrence Price replied with a smile. He wouldn't underestimate this old man just because of his age. They knew how important Herman Thompson was. After all, he was the patriarch of one of the 3 most prominent families in St. Louis. "There's no need to beat around the bush. Why are you looking for Mr. Williams? Maybe I can help you," Herman offered calmly.
"We've gathered accurate information that Kevin has the lost power pill formula in his hands, and the higher-ups are hoping that we can convince him to hand over the formula."
Indeed, Terrence got straight to the point. He knew very well that if he didn't have the approval of the Thompson family, he would have to face many difficulties if he wanted to openly take someone away from the Midwest. "Pill formula? Aren't you all daydreaming? Don't you know how useful pill formulas are to an herbalist? Mr. Williams will definitely not give it to you." Herman shook his head decisively. Joseph Thompson also started looking at the two of them differently. He was afraid that these men weren't going to leave until they got what they wanted.
"Don't worry, Grandpa Thompson. We'll come up with a way to convince Kevin. But for now, please do me a favor and send someone to bring him here."
Terrence didn't reveal any more details, but his face was full of confidence. Inside an ordinary residential apartment building in Chicago, Lily and Phoebe had just woken up from their unconscious state. When they found themselves tied up, the two women began to struggle with all their might in an effort to free themselves. However, because their mouths were stuffed with a towel, they could only make some muffled sounds. Suddenly, a man opened the door to the room. Because the light wasn't very bright, neither Lily nor Phoebe could clearly see the other person's face. "You don't need to be nervous. The ropes on your bodies were actually tied up by the people of the Herbalist Society. And I'm the knight in shining armor who will save you," the man playfully teased. "It's a pity that I can't let you leave just yet, but the two of you can rest assured that we won't hurt a single strand of hair on your heads." The man kept talking to himself. "We came to Chicago to discuss some things with Kevin Williams. But until we find him, I hope you don't feel wronged by any of this." Then the man clapped his hands and 2 young women walked into the room. "They're here to serve the two of you, so if you need anything, feel free to ask." The man turned around and left the room after he finished speaking. Lily wanted to say something but clearly didn't have the chance to say it. The two young women then respectfully untied them and removed the towels from their mouths. At the airport in Detroit, thousands of Radiance members were waiting to board their planes in an orderly manner. Currently, the Radiance was like a hand covering the sky in Detroit. After Kevin's order was given, Spencer immediately contacted all the airlines at the airport to delay all flights for regular passengers. This was to ensure that thousands of Radiance members could go to St. Louis as soon as possible. And since they weren't short on money, all of the airlines willingly agreed to accommodate their request.
"What do you think the Chancellor wants us to go to St. Louis for? Isn't that too far away?"
Isaiah Hill scratched the back of his head and asked curiously.
"As far as I know, there aren't any great powers in St. Louis. If all 8,000 of us were to rush there at once, wouldn't we scare those ordinary people so much that they'd wet their pants?"
Cameron Hill laughed as he joked about the operation. "Cameron, you can't say that. St. Louis is much more prosperous than Detroit. In their eyes, we're just like country bumpkins," Julia Hill said while slapping his arm with the back of her hand. "I guess the Chancellor wants to expand the Radiance's reach into St. Louis. But still, isn't the Midwest too small for us?" Sarah Hill frowned as she looked at the other Radiance members who were about to board their planes not far away.
"All right, let's not make any wild guesses here. Now, get everyone ready. This is the first time that the Chancellor has asked us to make an appearance in front of an important family. Don't do anything stupid. After all, we represent the Radiance, so we don't want to embarrass ourselves when the time comes."
Dylan Hill, the eldest brother, sternly reminded them of their duty.
"Understood,"
the other four answered at the same time. At the top floor of the Salix Leaf Hotel, Mitchell Cook, Rachel, Adriana Wright, and the others were all in the same room. Their eyes were constantly scanning the big computer screen in front of them.
"Have you found any news yet?"
Mitchell Cook asked on his phone.
"Give me a little more time. I've already sent people to search the whole city,"
Drake nervously answered.
"I'll give you another hour. If you haven't found anything by then, save me the trouble and go drown yourself in the lake."
After hanging up the phone, Mitchell Cook tossed his phone to the side. He turned around to Adriana Wright and asked,
"How's the situation over there?"
"We received the first batch of information from my people. The three families that were eliminated were the Jones, Butler, and Blair families. They were all families that had interacted with Kevin before." Adriana Wright looked at the document in her hand expressionlessly. "We also noticed that Kevin's mother-in-law, Dorothy, mysteriously disappeared a few days ago." Mitchell Cook and Rachel's faces turned extremely sad when they heard that. Why did it look like someone was really going after Kevin? Moreover, wasn't this mysterious enemy a little too terrifying? Whoever it was actually committed 3 massacres in broad daylight.
"This enemy seems to be quite powerful. Looks like we're going to have a tough battle with Kevin in Chicago."
Mitchell Cook was deep in thought. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the Thompson family's mansion in St. Louis, Joseph Thompson and Kevin were both pacing back and forth. Joseph had just briefed Kevin about the special representatives who were looking for him.
"Mr. Williams, you better not act too rashly later now that you know what they're after. These people were sent by the federal government after all."
Sweat had already appeared on Joseph Thompson's forehead as he warned Kevin sincerely. "I'm surprised that Grandpa Thompson is afraid of someone," Kevin remarked.
"It's true that nobody can touch the Thompson family in the Midwest. But although the federal government generally doesn't meddle in our affairs, we naturally have to abide by the law whenever they're around, if you know what I mean. Besides, they know you're not from around here, so it'll be harder to protect you outside of St. Louis," Joseph replied with a coy smile.
"I understand now that you've said that. Don't worry, I'll be careful." Kevin patted Joseph's shoulder to reassure him. After the two of them entered the hall, Kevin nodded and greeted Grandpa Thompson, then sat down in a chair. "Why did you call me here in such a hurry, Grandpa Thompson?" Kevin crossed his legs, leaned back in the chair, and asked him with a smile.
I've already informed my superiors regarding our conversation. I believe someone will come here soon, so you have nothing to worry about." He tried to be vague about the Radiants coming to St. Louis and pretended not to know what was about to happen. "Of course, I'll be at ease as long as you're handling things." Although Herman Thompson had a smile on his face, it was obvious that he felt awkward about the situation. Joseph Thompson, who was standing nearby, took a deep breath to calm himself down. He couldn't believe that Kevin would bring this up right in front of the two men that he'd just warned him about, but he just ignored him. "Anyway, Mr. Williams, let me introduce these two men to you. Their names are Terrence Price and Stanley Cooper, and they're special representatives sent by the federal government." Herman Thompson coughed and deliberately raised his voice. "My bad. I didn't realize you had other guests here until you mentioned it," Kevin slyly remarked as he gave the two men a quick glance. Terrence Price, who'd been looking at Kevin the whole time, seemed a little uneasy about Kevin's reaction. He thought to himself, "What the hell? How did he just notice us now? Does he have bad eyesight or something?" At the same time, Stanley Cooper held his head proudly and sneered at Kevin when he saw his unsightly clothes. "Who does this guy think he is? And why does Grandpa Thompson respect him so much?" However, Kevin kept ignoring the two of them and stood up from his chair. "Since you have guests here, I won't bother you anymore. I still have some business matters to tend to, so I should get going anyway. I'll come visit and have coffee with you some other time. Goodbye, Grandpa Thompson." Price and Cooper couldn't believe that Kevin was already heading for the door. What would they do now? At the Thompson family mansion, Joseph Thompson had just warned Kevin about the federal government's special representatives who were looking for him. When the two of them entered the hall, Kevin greeted Grandpa Thompson as if no one else was there with them, which drew the ire of Terrence Price and Stanley Cooper. But shortly after Kevin was formally introduced to them, he said he had to leave, pretending not to know the reason why he'd been asked to go there in the first place. This sudden turn of events stunned the four of them. How could they let Kevin just leave like that? The special representatives hadn't even said anything. "Stop!" Stanley Cooper stood up and shouted. "Is there anything else?" Kevin tilted his head and gave them an innocent smile. "We are the special representatives that were sent by the federal government." Stanley repeated who he was one more time. "So?" Kevin blinked and asked him casually. This made Stanley quite annoyed. Wasn't Kevin taking him seriously at all? "We've come here to find you, Mr. Williams. Don't act so presumptuously. Otherwise, don't blame us for what may happen to you." Stanley clenched his fists. "Oh, I'm definitely scared now." Kevin nodded mockingly. This almost made Stanley lose control of himself. At first, he thought that his threatening words would make Kevin change his attitude immediately. Who knew that Kevin would still have such a stubborn reaction? It felt like Stanley's words had fallen on deaf ears. Stanley was offended. Are you trying to provoke me? It's more challenging than you think." Kevin raised his eyebrows and interrupted Stanley. "In the past 2 or 3 years, I've heard all types of negative things said about me. You better think about what you're about to say next." "Are you trying to insult me?" Stanley stared at him, and the energy inside his body began to rise up. Just then, Terrence Price suddenly put his hand on Stanley's shoulder to calm him down. Then he walked towards Kevin and began to recall his background research on him. "Mr. Williams, you were originally a member of the Williams family from New York. 3 years ago, you were expelled from the family because you wanted to buy stocks in the Orion Group. You pushed through with your investment using your life savings, then you married into the Jones family where you became notorious for being a lazy son-in-law. Not long ago, the Orion's Group shares rose sharply and your wealth rose along with it. You even took over the Williams Company from the Williams family, but I'm curious about what happened to you since then." While Terrence was saying all of this, he was staring into Kevin's eyes the whole time. "You were able to become a martial arts expert with a high spiritual energy base, and you even mastered how to concoct the power pill and many other lost pill recipes. Isn't that true?"
It seemed like he wanted to see a reaction in Kevin's eyes. Unfortunately, Kevin didn't even blink. He remained completely unfazed by this. "Looks like you've done your research." Kevin nodded a few times. "Since you've investigated me quite thoroughly, you should also know about my temper. So it's best not to act so high and mighty around me. Otherwise, we'll have nothing further to talk about." In truth, Kevin had been teasing the two of them ever since he entered the hall, and decided to continue messing with them because he couldn't bear Stanley's rude behavior towards him. He wanted to show the two of them that he wasn't going to give them any respect just because they were special agents sent by the federal government.
"Now that we're already talking, I don't need to beat around the bush with you any longer. Hand over the Power Pills formula and we'll ensure your safety along with the people around you."
Terrence only wanted to complete his mission as soon as possible. Hearing this, Kevin suddenly laughed. A hint of disdain flashed across his eyes. "And why would I do that?"
"Kevin, stop being so self-righteous. You have no idea about the wrath you'll face in the future."
Stanley growled at him. "If you say one more word, I'll turn around and leave. Don't you believe me?" The smile on Kevin's face instantly disappeared, leaving only a threatening coldness.
"I already gave you a chance,"
Stanley yelled as he suddenly moved. The next moment, he appeared in front of Kevin.
"Today I'll teach you a lesson in humility."
Suddenly, Stanley's demeanor transformed, and he was like a wild animal. Without even waiting, he daringly threw a powerful punch at Kevin. Upon seeing this, Kevin quickly took a step back. However, although he managed to dodge Stanley's punch, the strong wind carried by it made Kevin wince. "I see you're quite strong. It would be impolite of me not to respond." Kevin immediately slapped Stanley's arm away and took a step forward. Then he launched a shoulder tackle at Stanley, which connected right in the man's chest. Kevin had pretty much perfected this attack. Back when he fought Jeffrey Bowie in a head-to-head battle, he used this same technique to gain the upper hand on his opponent. And Stanley was certainly no Jeffrey Bowie to begin with. As a result, Stanley was shoved back several states and took the brunt of Kevin's attack. He stumbled down on one knee as he struggled to gather himself together, and if he hadn't clenched his teeth, he would have spat out an enormous mouthful of blood. Both Herman and Joseph Thompson could only watch in awe as Kevin had beaten Stanley with a single move. At the same time, Terrence Price, who was now standing beside his partner, started to get very anxious. His pupils grew wide as he stood there in shock. He knew very well that Stanley was no longer able to fight.
"Kevin, wait a second."
Terrence Price quickly spread his arms to protect Stanley.
"Let's talk this through."
Kevin looked at him intently and smiled mockingly from the corner of his mouth. "Your partner is really bold. How dare he think that he could defeat me?"
"I know Stanley can be arrogant, but he has good intentions. Besides, only by working with us will you be able to survive."
Terrence, who no longer had any tricks up his sleeves, remarked,
"The government is aware that a battle between the forces of good and evil is brewing, and with all the great powers being involved, our superiors don't want this to turn into an all-out war that will cause massive casualties to ordinary citizens. We don't want them to be collateral damage in all of this."
These words made Kevin frown deeply. Herman Thompson, who was standing beside him, also had a baffled look in his eyes. Although these men were in his home, he didn't plan to interfere too much in the conversation between Kevin and the others. All he could do was to smooth things over in case the conversation got out of hand. "What do you mean?" Kevin suddenly had a bad feeling.
"Didn't the Williams Company auction off 100 Power Pills recently?"
Terrence heaved a sigh of relief. As long as Kevin was willing to listen to him, it proved that there was still room for negotiation. "So what?" Kevin asked in puzzlement.
"Mr. Williams, I think you should be very careful about publicizing your possession of the Power Pill. It was because of that auction that many families and organizations decided to make a move once they heard the news."
Terrence Price tried his best to explain it to Kevin.
"As a result, a lot of influential families want to take the pill formula out of your hands, and the most powerful one of them all is the Morris family. And we've received reliable information that the Morris family has already made their way to Chicago, and they're headed straight for your formula."
"The Morris family? Mr. Price, is this the same Morris family who has ties to the legendary Pinnacle?
Herman Thompson suddenly asked in disbelief as he felt a cold chill run down his spine. Terrence Price didn't say anything. He just smiled gravely and nodded his head to confirm Herman's suspicions. "Who is the Morris family?" Kevin asked. He was stumped by this mysterious new enemy. Could they be the ones behind all of the ruthless attacks in Chicago? And why was he only hearing about them now? Herman began to explain.
"They're a family with a long history."
"Grandpa Thompson, can we make it short? Let's just cut to the chase." Kevin interrupted Herman. With Lily and Phoebe's lives most likely in the hands of the Morris family, he was getting both curious and impatient to find out who he would be dealing with.
"This matter can't be explained in just a few words," Herman Thompson smiled stiffly. "The Pinnacle was reputed to be the most powerful underground organization in history. Everyone feared them, and one of the Morris family's ancestors was one of its founding members."
Herman continued.
"One day there was a falling out among the Pinnacle's founding families, and the Morris family was banished by the Pinnacle as a result. Using the knowledge of the organization, they eventually played a pivotal role, joining forces alongside other families and organizations in a concerted effort to defeat the Pinnacle. Now, that was a long time ago, and even with rumblings of the Pinnacle making a comeback, we don't really know where the Morris family's current intentions lie. So I think you'd better cooperate with Mr. Price and his partner. Given their background, the Morris family is definitely not an opponent that you can fight against now,"
Herman cautioned. Kevin widened his eyes in shock. A powerful family was abandoned by the Pinnacle and then helped defeat it in the past. But now it's going after him and his power pill formula. Moreover, with the federal government now getting involved, who could he trust to tell the truth? At this point, everyone portrayed themselves as being on the good side in this war. However, at the same time, they all seemed to have their own selfish agendas as well, self-righteously believing themselves to be morally above the rest. Now that Kevin was aware of the details, was he going to let any of these parties get what they wanted? For a moment, this made Kevin feel very suspicious as he thought to himself, "Trust no one." In the courtyard of the William family's mansion in New York, all the members of the Williams family were gathered together, holding their weapons in their hands tightly as they braced for an attack. The members of the Union who were standing in front of them were no longer as beautiful and mesmerizing as before. Instead, they all looked extremely miserable as they struggled to catch their breath. Some of them even had blood stains on the corners of their mouths and were nursing their wounds. And if it wasn't for Kelly Emmett and Ariana Titus supporting them, perhaps they would have already died earlier. About half an hour before, 5 men suddenly barged into the William family's mansion and stated that they wanted to find Kevin. The communication between the two groups obviously didn't go smoothly, and now the Williams family and the Union were in the midst of a fierce battle with the men. Each of the 5 men had their own unique skills, and the leader of the group had already defeated Renee Silver in less than 10 moves. If it wasn't for Vivian Meyer stepping in to protect them, the entire Williams family would have been destroyed by now.
"Renee, are you certain that Vivian can defeat those people?"
Thomas asked anxiously. "Don't worry, Thomas. The Enchantress already broke through as a level 7 expert 2 years ago. As long as she's here with us today, I'm sure she can guarantee the safety of the Williams family," Renee replied weakly as she recovered from her injuries.
"I really don't know how Kevin has managed to attract so many enemies. He's offended them so much that even though he's clearly been expelled from our family, they are still causing us trouble."
Thomas's son, Ethan Williams, grumbled and complained. Laura Williams stood behind Thomas and snarled, "To think that our family raised him for more than 20 years. Raising a pet dog is better than that useless trash of a nephew." Just then, Vivian Myers drew a sword from behind her back. As she drew her spiritual energy towards her hands, the sword looked as if it was glowing red, as she gently swung it in different directions, quickly destroying whatever was in its path. "The rose sword?" Renee's face was suddenly filled with joy.
When they saw this, the 5 men retreated without hesitation.
I didn't expect that the Williams family would have such a powerful expert staying with them. We'll meet again another time, Vivian Myers.
Then the leading man crushed a dark green pill in his hand. This caused a thick cloud of smoke to instantly fill the entire courtyard. By the time it dispersed, the 5 of them had already disappeared. "Enchantress, are you all right?" Renee hurriedly walked up and asked her.
"Thank you very much, Vivian,"
Thomas said respectfully.
"Enchantress Myers is so powerful, I'm sure she can kill Kevin,"
one of the Williams family members exclaimed.
"Once Kevin dies, the Williams family will regain its reputation. Anyone who offends the Williams family will be killed without mercy,"
another chimed in. The members of the Williams family started praising Vivian with all sorts of flattering comments. However, Vivian didn't pay attention to any of them. Instead, she looked in the direction where the 5 men had fled with a determined look in her eyes. Why is she still pretending to be so humble? Laura Williams couldn't stomach her reaction and muttered softly, "She can't be that impressive, can she?" In New York, the Williams family was suddenly attacked in the mansion by 5 powerful men. Despite handily defeating the rest of the Union members during their battle, they were eventually forced to retreat when Vivian Myers showed herself to be an unexpected and fierce opponent. After they were saved, the Williams family members all began to praise her, except for Laura Williams. While this was going on, in the Huxley family's mansion in St. Louis, Virgil Huxley was standing by the 3rd-floor window. In his eyes, you could see a somewhat decisive but complicated look, as if he was currently on the horns of a dilemma. Behind him stood a man with a robust build. His face looked very seriously as he waited patiently for Virgil to speak. After a few moments of silence, Virgil took a deep breath and asked,
"The Radiance is about to arrive here in St. Louis. Have you informed the forces in Blade Mountain yet?"
"Don't worry, Mr. Huxley. Everyone has been briefed and is ready," the man replied respectfully.
"Kevin must be so proud of himself, but he doesn't know what's coming," Virgil sighed. "How are the preparations going at the airport?"
"Everything has been set up there as well. Once the people from the Radiance get off the plane, the welcoming crowd of influential dignitaries led by Richard Swinton will be hit by an explosion," the man explained.
"Without the Radiance, everything in St. Louis is going to be in our hands soon."
Virgil let go of his clenched right hand and said,
"Oh, right. There is one more thing. It seems that Thornton hasn't been feeling well for the past few days. He hasn't left his room a single time."
"I understand. I'll go check on him."
After the man respectfully lowered his head, he turned around and left the study. Virgil patted the window and shook his head as he said,
"Kevin, you can't blame me for this. You can only blame yourself for being too ambitious. If I don't do this, how will the Huxley family be able to gain a foothold in the future? As the patriarch, I must do what's best for my family."
If everything went according to plan, then St. Louis would soon be under his control. It was just a matter of time. However, what he didn't know was how everything that happened in the study was being displayed on Thornton's computer. A few years previously, Thornton had begun to have suspicions about his father's true character. Because of this, he decided to set up hidden surveillance cameras in the corners of many rooms in the Huxley family's mansion so that he could eavesdrop on Virgil's conversations with other people. Just as he was thinking about what his father might do, there was a knock on the door.
"Mr. Huxley, are you there? Your father asked me to bring you some food,"
a deep voice asked him through the door. Thornton immediately recognized who was outside. He was Virgil Huxley's proud personal assistant, Curtis Green. "I'm not hungry, so you can go ahead and take it back to the kitchen." Thornton quickly turned his attention back to his computer.
"Mr. Huxley, please let me in. Your father has had this food especially prepared for you."
Curtis's angry tone didn't change at all. "I said I'm not hungry. Don't you understand? Now get lost and don't bother me." Thornton suddenly became angry too. This time there was no sound from outside the door, but after a few seconds, the door was suddenly kicked open. Thornton suddenly slapped the table as he stood up.
"What the hell do you want? How dare you barge into my room?" "Calm down, Mr. Huxley. Your father told me that you weren't feeling well, so I was also a little worried about your well-being."
Curtis immediately knelt on the ground as his gaze swept around the room, especially the computer on the table. Thornton pointed at the door and shouted,
"Get out before I have you punished. If you dare to barge into my room again like this in the future, I'll make sure to break your legs." "Mr. Huxley, please, go ahead and rest. I'll go away now."
Since he hadn't noticed anything unusual, Curtis slowly retreated. Thornton angrily closed the door on him and immediately fell into deep thought. Now he was sure that his father had something to do with the people who had taken over Blade Mountain. Furthermore, Thornton was actually very healthy. Why would his father say that he wasn't feeling well? He even sent Curtis over to bring him some food. Suddenly, Thornton thought of a possibility. A strong fear instantly rose from the depths of his heart and enveloped his entire body as he checked his computer screen. Luckily, he was able to close the surveillance footage just as the door had been kicked open. Curtis couldn't have seen anything that quickly, could he? In the main hall of the Thompson family's mansion, Terrence Price had just told Kevin everything that he knew. Meanwhile, Grandpa Thompson sat quietly in his chair and slowly sipped his coffee. "Are you saying that everything that happened in Chicago recently was ordered by the Morris family?" Kevin asked with a frown on his face. If what Terrence said was true, then he was definitely in a very dangerous situation right now.
"Well, we don't have any concrete evidence, but only the Morris family would have the strength and courage to do all that,"
Terrence replied very candidly. "Isn't there a law that prohibits martial arts experts from harming ordinary people, especially when their strength has been enhanced by medicinal pills? Isn't the Morris family afraid of going to jail for committing such heinous crimes?" Kevin asked somberly.
"It's hard to explain. First of all, learning martial arts isn't illegal, and on top of that, herbalism is a tricky subject to bring up in court. Given that its ingredients are all natural, it doesn't need FDA approval. And a lot of people are either still unaware or don't believe that some herbal pills have strength-enhancing capabilities."
Terrence's words were somewhat anxious and mixed with a sense of helplessness.
"For your safety, it's better not to return to Chicago any time in the near future."
"I can't do that. My wife and friend have both been taken away by them. How can I act as if it has nothing to do with me?" Kevin became riled up all of a sudden.
"As long as you're willing to cooperate with the federal government, we can negotiate with the Morris family on your behalf."
Terrence lied to himself and said,
"We still have ways of communicating with them, and we'll make sure your wife and friend will be released."
Kevin knew that Terrence couldn't really guarantee Lily and Phoebe's safety, but he didn't say anything more. At the same time, he also figured that he couldn't recklessly attack the Morris family with his current strength. That is, unless his mentor, the Night King, was willing to help. Unfortunately, the Night King was always elusive, and Kevin didn't even know if he was still alive or not. After careful consideration, Kevin let out a long breath. "Mr. Price, if you can save my wife and friend, I can consider giving the Power Pill formula to you." But before Terrence could reply, Kevin and Joseph Thompson's cell phones rang at the same time. When they answered their phones, they both received news that something bad had happened at the airport. The influential figures who were supposed to welcome the Radiance's members once they arrived in St. Louis had been attacked by an explosive device, and the number of casualties was still being determined. In the Archer family's mansion in Chicago, Dominic Archer was sitting on the sofa, looking at the reports in his hand. An extremely violent aura was being emitted from his body as he browsed through them. Meanwhile, Gwen Archer was stroking her forehead with one hand while she remained deep in thought. As the Steele family's influence had weakened, their own power increased rapidly. and the Archers were about to become the #1 family in Chicago.
Sis, what do you think about helping Kevin?
Dominic's brows furrowed as he spoke to her in a low voice. Bro, don't tell me you're interested in the reward that he's offering. Gwen suddenly turned around to answer him.
I can feel that my energy base has reached a bottleneck. With the help of a power pill, I'd definitely be able to break through to finally be a level 4 expert. When that happens, Drake Cook will no longer be a threat to us.
A hint of obsession and greed could be seen in Dominic Archer's eyes. But Drake has his father Mitchell Cook backing him up. How can we defeat him? Gwen quickly cast some doubt on her brother's plan. What's more, Mitchell Cook still has people like Rachel Collins and Adriana Wright helping him.
No matter what, we have to try. This is the last hurdle that we have to face before the Archer family can soar to the top.
Dominic immediately took out his phone and made a few calls. Inside the residential building where they were being held, Lily looked very haggard as she stared at the scenery outside the window. Phoebe, who was sitting beside her, also looked like she'd seen better days. Still, despite their situation, the man who had captured them kept his word and didn't make things difficult for them at all. In fact, he only took away their phones and prohibited them from leaving the room they were in. Moreover, the ropes that the Herbalist Society had used on them had been untied by 2 young women, who also served them meals and checked in on them throughout the day. Where do you think Kevin is right now? Phoebe asked as she stirred the coffee in her cup. Lily looked off into the distance and muttered, I hope he'll go to a place where no one can find him. Don't you want him to come and save us? Phoebe asked her. I'd rather he never came. The further away he is from Chicago, the better, Lily firmly insisted. In the past, she saw Kevin as a useless person who didn't have any ambition. However, he'd been silently working his way up without her knowing it. And as their relationship improved, there came a point where Lily suddenly felt that rather than it being Kevin who wasn't good enough for her, she became the one who wasn't good enough to be with him. No one knew this, but when Lily found out that Kevin was the president of the Williams Company, she wasn't happy at all. Instead, she was filled with helplessness and worry. She was afraid that the gap between her and Kevin would get wider and wider as he got busier with other endeavors, and she wouldn't be able to get back together with him in the end. Moreover, what else had she done besides create trouble for him? Now she had even been captured and used as a bargaining chip to threaten Kevin. Do you love him? Phoebe hesitated for a while, but still asked the question. I used to hate him, but I love him deeply now. Lily's expression didn't change at all as she added, being able to marry him was the greatest fortune in my life. Upon hearing this, Phoebe didn't speak anymore and slowly lowered her head. The sadness in her heart was even more bitter than her black coffee right now. In the Myriad's headquarters on Herring Island, Brett Stewart was in his study reviewing the recent events. Roger Knott suddenly rushed into the room and lowered his head.
Greetings, Supreme Commander. Roger, there's no need to be so polite. There are no outsiders here,
Brett said as he put down the document in his hand. Brett Stewart was very satisfied with Roger Knott's performance on the day Kevin sent Travis Adams' body back. Because of this, he promoted him to the rank of Grand Elder of the Myriads.
I have an urgent matter to report.
Roger nervously approached him.
What is it, Roger? It seems to have caused you a lot of distress.
Brett's interest was immediately piqued.
Supreme Commander, I've received news that the Myriads members from the Chicago branch have all joined the Radiants,
Roger explained with some embarrassment. Now, everyone in the Myriads knew that Brett Stewart and the deputy leader Kevin were like brothers to each other. At the same time, Kevin was the leader of the Chicago branch. And since everyone had already witnessed his energy base, no member dared to oppose him anymore.
Does that mean that Kevin has also decided to join the Radiants?
Brett's expression became slightly serious. Could his brother have chosen to betray him?
I'm not sure yet. The deputy leader hasn't appeared in Chicago for days, but I've received news that a lot of people are currently looking for his wife.
Roger Knott sighed. He had a great deal of respect for Kevin. After all, Kevin had previously saved him and his granddaughter Mackenzie's lives. Moreover, he'd even helped Brett Stewart take over the position of Supreme Commander and had stabilized the internal politics of the Myriads. However, the great powers hated traitors the most, and if Kevin had really joined the Radiants, many members of the Myriads would lose their confidence in Brett's leadership once again. Brett suddenly had an idea.
Roger, let me write them a letter now. Once I'm done, have someone send this to the headquarters of the Radiants as soon as possible.
At the Myriads headquarters, Brett Stewart had just been informed by Roger Knott that all of the members of their Chicago branch had joined the Radiants. Despite knowing that the branch was under Kevin's leadership, both Brett and Roger were reluctant to believe that Kevin was a traitor. Consequently, Brett decided to write a letter and have it immediately sent to the Radiants. Based on Brett Stewart's understanding of Kevin, there was no way he would do something as shameless as betraying the Myriads. With Kevin's own strength in the Infinity Palladium pendant, he could have totally ignored Travis Adams' last wish and assumed the position of Supreme Commander himself. In that case, if Kevin was greedy for power, why would he help someone else get promoted instead? More importantly, the rumor had yet to be confirmed. Without any tangible proof of Kevin's involvement with the Radiants, Brett had complete trust in his brother. Meanwhile, in the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford was anxiously pacing back and forth inside as he muttered to himself.
What should we do?
After a few minutes, Harley Shepard slowly walked in with some documents in his hand. He looked at him in surprise and asked,
What's wrong with you? Do you have hemorrhoids or something? Shut up, Harley. I don't have time to argue with you.
Wayne took a deep breath as he looked at him and said,
I was just given some alarming news. It seems that the Pinnacle tried to make a move earlier this afternoon.
In shock upon hearing this, Harley dropped the document in his hand and they fell to the ground with a loud bang.
What the hell? So the rumors are true. I can't believe that the Pinnacle is really back.
Even with Harley's normally calm personality, he couldn't help but lose his composure about this. However, he couldn't be blamed for doing so. The matter was far too important.
Fortunately, it was just a small group of lower-ranked members who were trying to cause trouble. However, as soon as they were discovered by one of the top 9 schools, they managed to quickly escape. Still, we're safe for now.
Wayne looked at him and there was clearly disdain in his eyes. Even if Wayne Ford didn't say it, Harley Shepard knew that this wasn't just a one-time thing. This was only just the beginning. And the Pinnacle would surely make its comeback known through bigger and bigger stunts in the future. The problem was, with the Pinnacle being so elusive, they had no way of knowing when its members would strike next. As a result, even if someone was able to stop them in the past, it wasn't like they would be discovered every single time. So if they weren't vigilant enough, it would only take one mistake for a catastrophe to occur, which would cause thousands of innocent lives to suffer.
Anyway, we must investigate whether something major has happened in the Midwest that hasn't been reported in the news yet. The Pinnacle wouldn't be able to sit still once its spies found out about it. I'm sure they can't wait to capitalize on an opportunity like this to wage war while everyone else is vulnerable.
Wayne stroked his chin in deep thought.
Will those kinds of matters affect the Pinnacle? Don't you think that they would just concern themselves with what's going on among the great powers?
Harley's brows furrowed as his face showed some concern.
Whether it's among the great powers or the business leaders, it seems that everybody is looking to gain more power and status now, so anything's possible. For all we know, some of them could even be aligned with the Pinnacle.
Wayne took a deep breath and ordered,
Gather everyone from the school right away. St. Louis is the central hub for business in the Midwest, and we must keep an eye on it.
Wayne continued,
Also, contact all the top schools immediately and ask them to send their leaders to the Healing Arts School for a meeting later today. Looks like we have a long night ahead of us.
I'll do that right away.
Harley didn't argue with Wayne. The situation was urgent, and it wasn't something that they could delay. In the grand hall of the Thompson family's mansion in St. Louis, Terrence Price stood behind Stanley Cooper, giving him a stabilizing pill to stabilize his condition. Luckily, the Thompson family had an extra one on hand from when Kevin first treated Herman Thompson. Apparently, Kevin's shoulder tackle earlier was much more serious than he'd imagined. Although Stanley looked fine on the outside, his internal organs had suffered significant bleeding due to the trauma caused by the collision. If he didn't stabilize his partner's condition in time, he probably would die right then and there. "Mr. Price, what do you think of Kevin?" Herman Thompson, who was sitting quietly in his chair, suddenly asked him. About 10 minutes ago, Kevin and Joseph Thompson had rushed to the airport together, along with Kyle Thompson, leaving Herman alone in the hall with Terrence and Stanley.
"He's neither too humble nor is he arrogant. Moreover, he seems calm and composed in the face of things. He'll definitely become a powerful force to be reckoned with in the future."
Terrence didn't hide anything and gave his honest opinion.
"I never thought that a useless son-in-law from a small family in Chicago would have such overwhelming strength."
After saying this, Stanley coughed violently a few times.
"Well, you deserved what happened to you. We were obviously here to discuss an important matter with him in a civil manner, but you decided that it would be easier for you to have a fight with him."
Terrence shook his head disapprovingly.
"And look where your temper got you. It didn't even take one strike before you were seriously injured. Let's just see how our boss will deal with you when we get back."
"Don't! Terrence, you have to keep this a secret for me. Given our boss's temper, he'll probably beat me to death himself if he finds out about this." Stanley immediately started to beg for mercy.
"Fine. Now will you stop talking? You'll need to rest if you want to recover."
Terrence focused on helping him stabilize his condition. At the same time, on the streets of St. Louis, 5 luxury black SUVs were leading the way. Behind them, there were also 6 more security vehicles escorting them. The civilian cars that were driving along their path all made way. While they couldn't make out who was inside the vehicles, anyone who saw this scene could tell that they were very powerful people. The person behind the wheel of the car at the center of the motorcade was none other than Kyle Thompson. Meanwhile, Joseph Thompson sat in the front passenger seat and tilted his head to discuss something with Kevin, who was sitting in the back seat. "Have you investigated what happened at the airport?" Kevin asked grimly.
"I'm sorry, Kevin. The accident happened very suddenly, so the investigation is still in progress. But while the culprit behind this was well prepared enough to catch us off guard, you can rest assured that we'll get some results soon,"
Joseph Thompson replied respectfully. Kevin took a deep look at him. "It seems that things are getting interesting here in St. Louis as well. A hidden enemy is about to reveal itself." If even the Thompson family was unable to investigate this matter clearly in a short period of time, this could only mean that the person who did this wasn't a small figure. Moreover, based on who the targets were, it was very likely that he was a local snake from St. Louis. "If you have any news, let me know immediately. I'll be the one to take care of the rest." Kevin's tone was filled with lethal intent. The atmosphere in the car instantly became a lot darker as both Joseph and Kyle Thompson couldn't help but shudder after hearing Kevin's ominous words. Just then, Kevin's phone rang, breaking the silence in the car. Who would call me at a time like this? Looking at the unknown number on the screen, Kevin slowly frowned. While he wasn't necessarily a difficult man to reach, Kevin did a good job by keeping his phone number a secret. Not many people knew about it. After hesitating for a while, Kevin finally picked up the phone and placed it on a loudspeaker for everyone in the car to hear. They all immediately heard a magnetic voice. It sounded very warm and pleasant. "Is this Mr. Williams?" "Who are you?" In comparison, Kevin's voice was much colder. "It doesn't matter who I am right now, but if you're interested in finding out, why don't you turn your car around and come meet me at the Botanical Garden? After all, the matters at the airport won't be settled anytime soon. I'll be waiting." The call was cut off as soon as he finished speaking. The atmosphere in the car returned to silence once again as even Kyle held his breath in anticipation. "Joseph, can we make a quick detour?"
Kevin was the first to speak.
Kevin, are you really going to meet that man?
Joseph asked him in surprise. Kevin was on the way to the airport along with Joseph and Kyle Thompson. Still not knowing the hidden enemy who was behind the attack, Kevin figured that only a local snake could have pulled off a stunt like that. Suddenly, Kevin received a call from an unknown number, and a mysterious man invited him to meet at the botanical gardens. Curious to find out who this was, Kevin asked Joseph if they could make a quick detour. He's already here, and based on what he said just now, he knows our location. Since I can't avoid him, I might as well go and meet him, Kevin replied with a smile.
Mr. Williams, you can't go there alone. You don't even know who you are dealing with. For all we know, it could be a trap.
Kyle Thompson couldn't help but advise his mentor. You're wrong about one thing. I'm not going there alone because you'll have to follow me, Kevin replied casually. Seeing that Kevin had made up his mind, Joseph Thompson didn't try to stop him anymore. Besides, Kevin was now his son's mentor, so he had no choice but to let Kyle follow him. After more than an hour, Kyle Thompson parked the car at the entrance of the botanical gardens. As soon as the two of them got out of the car, a couple of men came up to them.
Are you Kevin Williams and Kyle Thompson?
The leader of the men asked them respectfully.
Yes.
Kyle Thompson arrogantly responded as he put his hands in his pockets and slightly raised his head. Although he usually behaved normally in front of Kevin, he still carried the aura of a rich young man when he was out in public. The leader of the men turned to the side and made an inviting gesture.
Please, follow us. My boss has been waiting for you to arrive for a while now.
Two of the men led the way in front while the leader of the men walked alongside Kevin and Kyle. Another two men followed them from behind. Kevin's eyes quickly swept across the five men and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. All of them were level 5 experts. What a luxury to have such a lineup for protection. Because of this, Kevin couldn't help but feel even more curious about the identity of the person he was about to meet. As the group of people walked through the different garden areas, they didn't see a single person. It seemed like someone had cleared the place of any visitors or staff ahead of time. 10 minutes later, Kevin and Kyle arrived at a meeting room. The five men stepped outside the door, but their leader signaled for them to go inside. Once they entered the room, Kevin saw a man who was about the same age as him sitting on the sofa and smoking a cigar. This man had rounded eyebrows and blue eyes. With a handsome face and a charming temperament, he could easily be mistaken for a young model or celebrity. Mr. Williams, I've been hearing about you for quite some time now. It's good to finally see the face behind your famous name today. The man stood up, smiled, and his gaze stopped on Kyle Thompson. And if I'm not mistaken, are you Grandpa Thompson's beloved grandson? You truly look worthy of being his descendant. One look and I can tell that you're a lion among ordinary men. Faced with the continuous praise, Kevin and Kyle Thompson's faces both turned red and they were momentarily at a loss for words. Both of you, there's no need to be nervous. I've rented out this whole venue for the entire day, so think of yourselves as dear guests in my home. The man warmly invited the two of them to sit down on the sofa across from him. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Jake Morris. Since we're roughly the same age, you can just call me Jake. I hope I can address you as Kevin as well. Jake continued. Anyway, I came here on this business trip especially for you, Kevin. I know it's because you want the power pill formula that I have. Kevin leaned back on the sofa and said very directly. He really didn't understand why such a powerful family needed more power pills. Did the Morris family suffer a decline in their development since being banished by the Pinnacle? Kevin, I didn't expect you to be so straightforward, but now that you've mentioned it, I won't play games with you. I have two main objectives in coming to St. Louis. One is to seek the power pill formula. Also, I would like to invite you to our family mansion as a guest. Jake personally poured a glass of red wine for the two of them. Why are you so sure that I'll give you the formula? Kevin asked with a frown.
Because you're a smart man, Kevin. Jake's expression didn't change at all. He kept smiling as he said, and before meeting you, I sent someone to inquire about you. I know that you don't quite see eye to eye with a few families in Chicago, so I've sent my men to take care of that problem. Also, we've already spoken with the Williams family in New York, so I believe they won't come to find trouble with you again in the future. Jake gave Kevin a mischievous smile. Kevin's eyebrows suddenly furrowed. Jake had just practically admitted that he was the one who eliminated the Jones, Butler, and Blair families, and it seemed like he was doing this in an effort to please him. Furthermore, he'd even gone after the Williams family. Weren't the members of the union staying with him as well? I'm guessing that my wife and friend must also be in your hands, right? Kevin asked in a low voice. Those lowly people from the Herbalist Society dared to offend you by kidnapping them, so I sent my men to save your wife Lily along with your friend Phoebe, Jake explained frankly. Kevin, don't worry. The two of them are in safe hands. Under my men's protection, I can assure you that they will be in no danger at all. Kevin didn't say anything else. He just stared into Jake's eyes quietly, trying to read them. However, he still couldn't figure out the man's character. Kevin, I know that your time is actually quite precious, so let's cut to the chase and talk about our terms. Jake straightened his upper body and broke the silence in the room. In exchange for the Power Pill formula, you'll become a dear friend of the Morris family. And with us secretly supporting you behind the scenes, you'll definitely have smooth sailing to success in the future. As you continue to rise in power, your achievements will definitely be limitless. When Kyle Thompson heard this, his eyes widened. Jake's words were very obvious. He was clearly telling Kevin that if the Morris family treated him as a friend, they would be able to give him whatever he needed for the rest of his life. However, he could also tell that if Kevin wasn't tactful enough and arrogantly refused to hand over the Power Pill formula, the Morris family would swiftly destroy him and everything he had with thunderous force. In the meeting room of the Healing Arts School, various elders and leaders of the great powers had gathered together. They were all whispering to each other with their heads lowered.
It won't be easy to deal with the Pinnacle. If we don't pay attention to when they strike next, our school will be destroyed and our students will die. We'd lose everything in an instant, one of the leaders feared. I can't believe that they're really about to make a fierce comeback. It seems like we have to make preparations as soon as possible in order to avoid a catastrophe. We can't let them win this war, an elder adamantly declared. It's been many years since we all joined forces in stopping the Pinnacle. We barely managed to defeat them before. How are we going to stop them now? Another leader raised some concern. Let's hear what Wayne Ford has to say first. Since he's gathered us all here today, I think he has a detailed plan in mind. The second elder reassured them. Amidst the discussions of the representatives from the smaller organizations, Paul Vaughn and the other leaders from the top schools all had grim expressions on their faces. This was because they didn't see anyone from the union. Was this because the Healing Arts School and the union had a falling out? Why were both sides too petty and arrogant to reconcile? The 10 major schools represented the most powerful organizations among everyone in the room. They therefore bore the biggest responsibility of protecting society against not just the Pinnacle, but the people from the Myriads and the Alliance at the same time. And given this common goal, the other leaders believed that the two should have set aside their differences and concentrated all their forces behind a united front. Everyone, please be quiet for a moment.
Wayne Ford had just stood up, trying to restore some order in the meeting room. But before he could say anything else, someone suddenly shattered the door to the room. Everyone inside slammed their hands on the table and immediately stood up.
Who dares to cause trouble here?
One of the leaders was angered by this intrusion.
Do you know who we are? Don't even think about leaving this place unharmed,
one of the elders threatened. 2 figures slowly walked into the meeting room amidst all the loud shouting. and when everyone realized who had arrived, the atmosphere changed all of a sudden.
I thought it was someone else. It turns out that the Union's Enchantress is here,
one of the leaders exclaimed.
Greetings, Enchantress Myers. Do you still remember me? I went to the Union's headquarters to pay you a visit a while back.
An elder smiled as he greeted her.
The Union really knows how to make an entrance. I wasn't expecting them to come today.
Another leader was in disbelief. When Paul Vaughn and the other leaders of the top school saw Enchantress Myers and Renee Silver, they became quite unnerved. They couldn't believe it either. At the Healing Arts School, the Great Powers leaders and elders had gathered together for a meeting that had been called by Wayne Ford. However, just as the meeting was about to start, the room's door was suddenly shattered as two figures slowly walked in. Once everyone realized that it was Vivian Myers and Renee Silver, they were in disbelief that the Union had actually come. However, Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford weren't surprised. Despite their differences, the most important thing for the Great Powers was to maintain their status. So it wasn't really a shameful thing to join forces and use their combined strength to get rid of their common enemy. Otherwise, they would have to admit defeat and lose everything they had worked for. And that was an alternative that none of them were willing to accept. Now that both the Union and the Healing Arts School's leaders were there, the question was, would the two organizations actually get along?
You really think that you're above us all, don't you? How dare you come to my school and cause such a big commotion? Why don't you take Harley and me seriously?
Wayne Ford snapped. My strength may not be as great as yours, Wayne, Vivian Myers coldly scoffed and said. But I can't believe that you quietly expelled all the members of the Union from this school, and even cut off all contact with us. Furthermore, you didn't tell us that all the Great Powers would be gathering for a meeting here at the Healing Arts School today. Why don't you think highly of the Union? The atmosphere in the meeting room suddenly became tense as no one else dared to speak. Harley Shepard finally spoke up to try and smooth things over.
Why don't we set our differences aside for now? After all, didn't you come here to join forces with everyone?
We only came here today for one person. Isn't Kevin Williams your student? When Vivian mentioned Kevin's name, her violent intent flashed in her eyes. At the Radiance's headquarters, Dalton slowly sat down on a stool with Miranda's help. He looked at all of the members who were training not far away from them.
I never expected Kevin to be involved with not only the Myriads, but also a new force like the Radiance, Dalton remarked. Because Dalton had previously taken the energy transfer pill, this allowed him to absorb all of Travis Adams' energy before he died. As a result, his body strength wasn't something an ordinary person could compare with. So even though he'd suffered a very serious injury at the hands of the Union, he was already able to get out of bed and walk after only resting for a day or two. Hubby, I think you're extremely fortunate that you became friends with Kevin when we went camping, Miranda, who was sitting across from Dalton, said in a low voice. That's right. The Steele family owes Kevin too much.
Dalton paused for a second and turned around to look at his wife. Then he continued in a serious tone of voice.
After this incident, I've clearly realized a problem. No matter how strong an ordinary family is, it can't be compared to the strength of the Great Powers. Now that I think about it, I want to establish my own organization. At the very least, I can ensure that you and Grandpa will be safe.
After hearing this, Miranda was touched. She reached out and held Dalton's arm. Hubby, you can do whatever you want. It's just that the establishment of a new organization seems quite complicated. You'll need access to money, manpower, material resources, medicinal pills, and martial arts training. But if you really want to start your own, it would be best to wait for Kevin to come back and discuss it with him. Dalton looked at his wife lovingly and nodded in agreement. Deep down, he wanted to establish his own organization because he felt like he needed to step up. Among the three brothers, Brett Stewart was the supreme commander of the Myriads, while Kevin had high-ranking positions in both the Myriads and the Radiants. And as the energy base of his two brothers grew higher and higher, the sky was the limit for both of them. In contrast, aside from having Travis Adams' energy and the Infinity Sword, Dalton didn't have much to show for it since he was the only one who wasn't part of any powerful organization. He couldn't possibly ask Kevin or Brett to send their men to protect his family every time they were in trouble, could he? The airport in St. Louis had already been blockaded by the government, and more than 10 ambulances had arrived at the scene. Their red and blue lights lit up everyone's eyes. Thousands of members of the Radiants were standing at the airport waiting in an orderly fashion. Dylan Hill had told them that they couldn't move until they received Kevin's next order. "Where's Herman Thompson?" Dylan Hill shouted at the top of his voice as he stepped in front of the crowd of St. Louis's most influential people, along with 50 of his men.
"What the hell? Do you know who you're shouting at? Even if you're from the Radiant, you can't act so arrogant towards us."
The influential men who had just been attacked by the explosion were definitely in a bad mood. Just as they'd finally managed to calm down and gather themselves together, a young man from the Radiants had dared to ask them a question so rudely.
"You want to see the Thompson family's leader as soon as you arrive in our city? Who do you think you are to demand that? This is St. Louis. You're not the one who's calling the shots around here."
How could Dylan listen to such condescending words being directed not just at him but at the entire Radiance organization? As he fumed in anger, a terrifying aura instantly covered the entire airport. As a result, the faces of all the people who were enveloped by this field of energy instantly changed. It was only at this moment that they realized one thing. The Radiance was a powerful organization, and it wasn't afraid to shed blood if someone got in their way.
"I don't want to have to ask you this a third time. Either you take us to the Thompson family's patriarch, or I'll force you to shut your mouths,"
Dylan Hill said roughly.
"Herman Thompson is already too old to leave their family's mansion, but we were told that his son would come on his behalf. It's just that he isn't here yet."
Someone bit the bullet and answered the question in a hesitant voice.
"I'm here,"
someone called out from not far away. Everyone turned their heads and saw Joseph Thompson running towards them at lightning speed.
"You must be Dylan Hill from the Radiants, aren't you? Mr. Williams had something to attend to at the last minute. Let me take you guys to the Swinton family's mansion right away."
Dylan Hill searched the crowd, but he couldn't find either Richard Swinton or Virgil Huxley. He immediately began to have some doubts. Shouldn't the two of them be in charge of the situation at the airport?
"Where did Richard go?"
Joseph casually asked the other influential leaders in the crowd.
"He went to the hospital to help take care of some of the wounded. He still needs to go to the police station afterwards for questioning," someone answered. "All right, I guess I'll take you guys to the Swinton family's mansion now."
Joseph Thompson glanced at all the Radiance members who were standing nearby.
"But you guys have so many people. Let's split into 2 groups. The other group can stay and rest in our family's mansion for a while." "All right, I'm sorry to trouble you."
Dylan Hill respectfully lowered his head to Joseph without paying any attention to the others. Other than Joseph Thompson, the rest of the influential leaders in the crowd were just a bunch of ants as far as he was concerned. Meanwhile, in the meeting room at the Botanical Gardens, Kevin and Kyle Thompson's expressions became strange. The main reason was that Jake Morris was really good at talking. He sounded just like a salesperson. "Mr. Williams, do you think that the Morris family is sincere in both their actions and what they're offering?" Kyle whispered to Kevin. "I know that the Herbalist Society has also been causing you some trouble. They even kidnapped your wife and friend. As long as you're willing to cooperate with us, I'll help you deal with them in a matter of minutes. What do you think?" Jake smiled as he continued his pitch. "You don't need to worry. We'll be discreet so no one will find out about your involvement. If you need anything, just tell me." Kevin rubbed his temples. Up until now, he was sure of 2 things. First of all, Lily and Phoebe's lives weren't in any danger. And second, the Morris family had expressed their goodwill towards him. But something still didn't add up. "Jake, may I ask you something? I heard that the Morris family used to be part of the Pinnacle as one of its founding members." Kevin tried his best to calm his thoughts. "But if your family is already quite powerful, I don't understand why you would still want the Power Pill formula." Jake's face suddenly changed from a cheeky smile to a serious expression when he heard this question. After hesitating for a few seconds, Jake slowly opened his mouth and replied, "Kevin, I can answer your question, but I hope you can keep it a secret." Back at the Botanical Gardens, Jake Morris had been pitching his ideas to Kevin like a good salesman. While Kevin could tell that Lily and Phoebe weren't in any danger and he felt that the Morris family was sincerely offering their support, something still didn't quite add up. So he asked Jake why a family as powerful as theirs still wanted the Power Pill formula. Jake hesitated for a few seconds before agreeing to answer Kevin's question, as long as he promised to keep it a secret. The Power Pill was originally concocted by an ancient herbalist grandmaster. As you may already know, experts below level 3 can use it to improve their energy base and eventually break through the bottleneck in their training, Jake explained. Now, for the Morris family, training our strength is just a small matter like eating and drinking. And with the support of a powerful bloodline, the number of experts in our family will continue to increase exponentially. Hearing Jake's explanation, Kevin and Kyle Thompson became even more puzzled. "You just mentioned that the Morris family has a powerful bloodline. If that's the case, then why do you still need the Power Pill?" Kevin asked again in surprise. "Kevin, please listen to me first. I was just about to get to my point," Jake continued. "As you mentioned, the Morris family has a long heritage of powerful experts who have passed down their energy from one generation to the next. However, as our family has expanded throughout the years, the amount of spiritual energy running through the veins of the current generation is significantly less compared to that of our ancestors. With a low energy base, younger members of the Morris family have struggled to break through to the higher levels. However, the Power Pill should solve this bottleneck in our training. And with the formula in our hands, we can ensure that the Morris family will preserve its legacy for generations to come," Jake declared with a serious expression. Kyle Thompson slowly turned his head and looked at Kevin to see his reaction. This time he kept quiet and decided to reserve his judgment until after Jake had finished speaking. As for the Pinnacle, to make a long story short, there came a point when our family no longer saw eye to eye with the other founding families. And since being banished, the Morris family has cut all ties with them. We even joined forces with the great powers in defeating them many years ago. Currently, the Pinnacle is planning a comeback, and all the great powers are once again actively preparing for the possibility of another war. When the time comes, the Morris family will certainly do their best to protect the safety of the world. Given this, I'm hoping that you'll agree to our request and hand over the Power Pill formula to us," Jake finally finished explaining. Kevin lowered his head and took a few moments to gather his thoughts. "Okay, I promise to give it to you," Kevin finally made up his mind. "But I have one condition." "We'll do anything that you want, Kevin. Even if you want the stars in the sky, we'll find a way to get them for you," Jake promised. "It's nothing like that. There's no need to exaggerate." Kevin paused for a second. "Given that, a lot of people are after the Power Pill formula as well. Just promise me that other than the members of the Morris family, no one else will benefit from it. That means you can't give the pill formula or offer the pills to anyone else, especially the leaders of the top 10 schools." Jake immediately agreed on behalf of his family. "I can guarantee," however, Kevin quickly interrupted him. "Your promise isn't enough. I want the people in charge of your family to come and talk to me. Once we come to an agreement, the Power Pill formula will be yours." Kevin knew very well that if he didn't show a bit of strength, then the rest of the Morris family wouldn't pay any attention to him. And if that happened, he couldn't guarantee that they would help him increase his social status and power. "I'll report this to my family immediately." Jake looked at Kevin deeply and suddenly asked, "There's one more thing. Kevin, may I ask if you still have the night dagger in your hands?" Kevin's pupils grew wide when he heard this. The night dagger had been given to him by the Night King, and no one had asked him about it in a very long time. "Does that also have anything to do with your family?" Kevin asked him cautiously. "To tell you the truth, the night dagger was actually forged by one of our family's ancestors." Jake thought for a moment and explained in detail. "We've traced its origin back to around 3,000 years ago when our family's top expert used special metals to forge it, and used it to fight countless battles. However, a few hundred years ago, our family was invaded by bandits, and the night dagger was lost from our possession at that time. Since then, we've heard stories of it being wielded by some legendary warriors. And now that it has fallen into your hands, it can only prove that you were the chosen one, and that you're destined for greatness yourself." Jake continued, "As long as the night dagger doesn't fall into the wrong hands, we have no intention of forcefully taking it back. Given that it's a very powerful weapon, you must protect your own heart, and don't let yourself be overcome by its hostility. Always use it for the greater good, and protect the world against the forces of evil." In the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch, Nadia Alexander sat on a chair as she looked at the power pill in front of her. Kevin's words had undoubtedly torn a hole in her heart. It had been a long time since she'd joined the Herbalist Society and sold her soul, but now it finally seemed like leaving it wasn't impossible after all. Only the people in the Herbalist Society knew how dark this huge organization truly was. It was a stark contrast from the image it always showed to the public. "Am I really leaving?" Nadia muttered to herself. "But where did this courage come from? What should I do? Can the Radiants really take me in?" The usually calm and collected Nadia Alexander seemed so helplessly conflicted at this moment. Meanwhile, in the study of the Huxley family's mansion in St. Louis, Virgil Huxley suddenly threw the glass of whiskey in his hand onto the floor.
"You idiots! That bomb was supposed to get rid of the Radiants. But why did you harm the most powerful leaders of St. Louis instead? Don't you know that I'll be needing their support in the future?"
Virgil roared at the men who were kneeling in front of him.
"Mr. Huxley, please don't blame us for this. Things were going as planned until our men were suddenly attacked. Because of this, they had no choice but to detonate the device ahead of schedule. Rest assured, only a handful of the influential figures died. A small number of them were also injured, but the rest were merely frightened."
Curtis Green answered with his head lowered in fear.
"Who would dare to come and interfere with my plans?"
Virgil was suddenly stunned.
"We don't know either, but those people were all agile and strong. They even took 2 of our men away."
Curtis braced himself as he reported this.
"What?"
Virgil kicked him hard to the ground in anger.
"How on earth could you let that happen? Do you know how big of a scandal this will cause if word gets out about who was behind the attack?"
"Don't worry, Mr. Huxley. Those 2 men were given special poison pills before the operation. They definitely won't live more than 24 hours without an antidote," Curtis quickly reassured him.
"You better make sure that they won't talk. Otherwise, don't blame me for what will happen to you."
Virgil clenched his fists tightly. Thornton, who was watching the surveillance footage in his room, heard everything clearly. After seeing what had happened earlier at the airport on the news, he couldn't believe that his father had really been behind it all. Wasn't Dad quite fond of Kevin? He even wanted to meet with the Radiants himself. Why did he do this then? Also, why does he need the support of the other influential figures? What exactly is he planning to do? All kinds of questions popped up in Thornton's mind. Richard Swinton had just finished giving his statement at the police station and was now back in St. Louis Downtown Hospital. More than a dozen influential figures had been injured in the explosion, and 2 of them were still in critical condition.
"What happened, Mr. Swinton? Why was there an explosion at the airport?" one of them inquired. "Didn't we promise the Radiants that they could move into St. Louis? We were even there to give them a grand welcome," another remarked as he nursed his wounded arm.
"Did Mr. Williams do this to display the Radiants' strength? Since he's your adopted son, you owe us an explanation, Richard," a third one demanded. Hearing their complaints, Richard didn't know how to respond to them. After a few moments of silence, he finally gathered himself together enough to address them.
"Everyone, please be patient. The matter is still currently under investigation, so let's not point any fingers for now. I don't know the reason behind this attack yet, but there's one thing I can assure you. The explosion has nothing to do with the Radiants, and it wasn't ordered by Kevin."
However, as soon as these words came out of his mouth, Richard felt that they weren't convincing at all. At the St. Louis Downtown Hospital, Richard Swinton had just returned from the police station when he was confronted by the wounded member of St. Louis's elite. As they began to blame the attack on Kevin and the Radiants, Richard tried his best to reassure them of his adopted son's innocence. However, his words weren't that convincing to any of them. Even though the Swinton family was powerful, they wouldn't dare to easily offend the public. After all, the higher one's status was, the more they valued their reputation. And Richard Swinton was very clear about ensuring that the entire Swinton family was respected in the eyes of other members of society. This now included Kevin. However, after this incident, it seemed that he had a tough task at hand. Was he willing to risk his own reputation just to defend his adopted son?
"Mr. Swinton, you're a very prominent person in St. Louis. We wouldn't dare to make things difficult for you, but you must let Mr. Williams come out of hiding," one of the injured men demanded.
"Because you were the one who convinced everyone to let the Radiants come to St. Louis. I'm holding you accountable for today's disaster if Mr. Williams doesn't show himself. None of this would have happened without you and your adopted son. And for all we know, you could have planned this whole thing along with him,"
another accused him. A third one gave an ultimatum.
"That makes sense. Since the incident started because of him, then he'd better show up here and give us a good explanation. And to prove your innocence, the 2 of you must tell us who the real culprit is."
The more the dozen or so injured men spoke, the more riled up they became. Richard simply sighed and closed his eyes, hoping to find some answers soon. "Now that we've finished discussing the matter, we need to get going. There's still an enormous mess at the airport that I need to deal with." After saying this, Kevin stood up and was about to leave after giving his word to Jake. "Wait a minute, Kevin. Speaking of the incident at the airport, I think I can provide you with some help." Jake Morris suddenly stopped him in his tracks. Just then, one of Jake's men immediately pushed the door open and entered, dragging 2 other men inside with him before tossing them to the ground. They were all tied up and their mouths had been covered by tape. "Who are these men, Jake?" Kevin asked, puzzled. "You might not know it, but these were 2 of the culprits behind the explosion earlier today. Shortly after my arrival in St. Louis, I knew that the Radiance was also set to arrive soon, so I had some of my men monitor the situation at the airport. While doing their rounds, they happened to catch these 2 holding the bomb. Unfortunately, they weren't able to stop them from detonating it, and not all of the suspects were caught since the airport was already thrown into chaos by then," Jake explained with a faint smile. Kyle Thompson and Kevin both looked at each other in surprise at the same time. The explosion at the airport had just happened, and up until that point, no one had been able to provide any information on who was behind all of this. Given this, the fact that an outsider like Jake was able to monitor the entire situation and capture these 2 men meant that he had access to an extensive intelligence network that was unmatched by anyone else in St. Louis. This was enough to prove how truly powerful the Morris family was. No wonder Jake told them not to worry about the situation too much when he invited them to meet with him at the botanical gardens. Think of it as a bonus gift from me to you. You can do whatever you want with them. Jake smiled as he handed over the right to deal with the two suspects. Kevin was just blown away at this point. He'd already said that he would give the power pill formula to the Morris family. And now this? Jake Morris was like the gift that kept on giving. He then turned his attention to the two suspects. Who ordered you to cause trouble at the airport? Kevin wouldn't be polite as he ripped off the tape from their mouths. It was obvious that the two men weren't going to answer Kevin's questions very willingly. They even tilted their heads to the side and avoided his gaze.
We're not afraid of death. With the poison pill that we were given, we'll die within 24 hours anyway,
one of the men snarled at him.
Even if we told you, our boss would probably kill us when he finds out. Either way, we'd lose our lives,
the other added. I see that you both have a backbone, but it's a good thing I have something that can bite through even the hardest of bones. Kevin suddenly smiled at them cruelly. Then he pulled out 2 brown pills from his pocket and forcefully stuffed them into the men's mouths. This is a bone-biting pill. Whoever takes it will have all their bones slowly gnawed at little by little until they're gone, causing them to suffer immensely before inevitably dying within a span of 2 hours. If you can no longer withstand the torment, just let me know if you're ready to talk. Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest without the slightest bit of worry. However, in his heart, he was really hoping to get some information from the two of them. After all, the Radiance's moves into St. Louis was his most important chess piece at the moment. And since there was someone who wanted to make things difficult for him, then Kevin definitely wouldn't let that person get away with it once he found out who it was. Jake looked at Kevin with approval. What their family needed was a decisive partner, and if Kevin had acted too cowardly, then Jake wouldn't be able to take him seriously. After a few minutes, the faces of the 2 men who were kneeling on the ground started to turn red. At the same time, they felt a combination of an uncontrollable itch and endless pain coming from the depths of their bones, as if countless ants were biting them nonstop. And since they were tied up, they couldn't even scratch themselves with their hands. What kind of torture was this? Soon, the 2 of them started to roll on the ground, and they even let out a snort like they were pigs. Kevin, you're really good at this. There was no fear in Jake's eyes. Instead, it was as if he was binge-watching a movie on his phone, enjoying every second of seeing how long the 2 suspects would endure the torture. If only he had a bag of chips that he could snack on. I'm glad this little trick of mine has caught your eye. Kevin smiled as he casually glanced at him. Out of everyone in the meeting room, the one who was the most shocked to see all of this was Kyle Thompson. After all, he was just an ordinary man. Every word that he heard from Kevin and Jake stirred up a huge wave of emotion in his heart, but he chose not to express his thoughts. Are you really not afraid that the 2 of them will die without telling you anything? Jake smoked a cigar and joked. Since they no longer had any use for the 2 suspects, he didn't mind watching them struggle. Whether they live or die, it doesn't matter to me. These 2 are just scapegoats. Either way, I'll find the real culprit who is responsible behind the scenes. After Kevin said this, he was stunned by himself. Since when did he become this ruthless? In the past, no matter how angry he was at someone, he would never treat another human life as expendable. At that moment, the 2 suspects could no longer bear the torture. It felt like they were facing a fate worse than death. As they struggled helplessly on the ground, they kept begging Kevin for mercy.
Mr. Williams, please let us go. We'll tell you everything.
You didn't even last 10 minutes? Aren't you supposed to be tough guys? I'm sure you can endure it for a little while longer. Kevin didn't seem to be in a hurry to end their misery. When they heard his callous reply, the 2 desperate men wanted to strangle Kevin to death. What the hell? Why don't you give it a try and see if you can last for 10 minutes?
However, these were just their inner thoughts, and they definitely wouldn't dare to say it out loud like idiots. Kevin shook his head and threw 2 white pills on the ground. Those are the antidotes. They should reverse the effects of both the bone-biting pill and the poison pill. The 2 suspects crawled like worms on the ground and hurriedly ate the pills. This gave them instant comfort, but at the same time, their breathing had also become sluggish. It seemed that almost 10 minutes of struggling with unimaginable discomfort and pain had been too taxing on their stamina. "Now, can you tell me who your boss is?" Kevin sneered at the 2 of them.
We work for the Huxley family,"
one of them answered weakly. His eyes were filled with fear as he looked at Kevin. "The Huxley family? That means Virgil Huxley was behind the attack," Kyle Thompson murmured in surprise. Kevin suddenly looked at Kyle and then turned his attention back to the 2 suspects. "Do you know why Virgil Huxley did this?" "Mr. Huxley said that you were too ambitious, and he couldn't let you continue to rise in power at his expense," the second suspect explained. The 2 of them went on to reveal what orders they'd received from Virgil, and when Kevin heard that their original target was supposed to be the members of the Radiants, his expression became more and more serious. Virgil Huxley was actually the local snake all along? How could he have misjudged him as an honorable man when they first met? "Jake, please help me keep an eye on these 2 suspects while I'm away," Kevin said slowly. "No problem. It's been a tiring business trip so far, so I've decided to stay in St. Louis for a few days." Jake nodded and smiled at him. "Kyle, let's go to the airport right now." Kevin turned around and immediately walked out of the meeting room. He didn't stop at all as Kyle quickly followed closely behind him. The moment the door closed, Jake's face suddenly changed. The viciousness in his eyes made the other men in the room so nervous that they didn't even dare to breathe. Kevin was in disbelief after finding out that Virgil Huxley was the local snake behind the explosion at the airport, and that the members of the Radiants were his intended target. So Kevin asked Jake to keep an eye on the 2 suspects before he and Kyle Thompson left for the airport. However, when the door of the meeting room closed, Jake Morris had a vicious look in his eyes that made everyone else in the room nervous. "A mere ant like you won't be able to do much." Jake waved his right hand, then tossed his burning cigar onto the floor. Who was he referring to? "Mr. Williams, what do you think of Jake Morris?" Kyle Thompson, who was driving the SUV, suddenly asked him. "He's definitely a good talker, but I don't trust him one bit." Kevin's eyebrows furrowed as he looked at the road in front of him. He was thinking about something and had a very pensive look on his face. "Why do you say that?" Kyle asked curiously. Although he hid it well, there was a certain coldness in the depths of his eyes that never completely disappeared. Kevin leaned back in the seat and let out a long breath. While he had previously promised Jake the power pill formula after meeting the Morris family patriarch, it was all just a delaying tactic. And even though Jake had told him why his family needed the pill formula, Kevin quickly realized that he didn't really know anything else about the Morris family. And if he blindly made a move and they suddenly turned hostile toward him, it wouldn't be an easy situation for him to get out of if anything went wrong. Kevin was no longer just a useless son-in-law. He had his parents and friends behind him, and he was responsible for the lives of tens of thousands of people from the Radiants. Moreover, Lily and Phoebe were still in the Morris family's hands. To put it bluntly, Kevin was aware that his current energy base was still too weak to protect everyone who surrounded him from a powerful threat. And since he didn't have the strength to go up against the Morris family, he had to make sure that he played his cards right both in front of them and behind the scenes. Suddenly, Kevin turned his head and quickly grabbed Kyle Thompson by the shoulder. A second later, a black dot fell from the sky without warning and hit the luxury SUV that they were in, causing the car to explode in an instant. This horrifying scene frightened the surrounding pedestrians, and the drivers on the road who were caught off guard had to frantically turn their steering wheels to avoid the burning car. As a result, Some cars crashed into poles and barriers, while others found themselves in part of a chain reaction of multiple car collisions. On the roof of a building 100 yards away, a man quickly threw away the device in his hand, then picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Tell the boss that the target has been cleaned up." The emotionless voice on the other end of the phone replied, "Very good. Now come back here and receive your reward. Make sure no one follows you." As the man hung up the phone, he couldn't help but whistle loudly to celebrate. But just as he was about to leave, he heard a gruff voice call out to him, "Leaving so soon? I just got here." When he heard this, the man quickly took out the dagger from his waist and dropped his stance. He kept looking around, but he couldn't see anyone. "Who are you looking for?" the same voice asked him. Feeling a powerful aura behind him, the man decisively thrust his dagger backward. "Too slow!" Kevin coldly snorted. He grabbed the man's arm and twisted it with enormous force. A crisp sound could be heard as Kevin twisted the man's right arm into a pretzel shape. Blood kept dripping onto the ground, and the man's screams of pain could be heard all over the roof. "If you want to live, then answer my question honestly." Kevin decisively kicked the man's left leg. Another cracking sound could be heard, and the intense pain from his broken leg made the man grit his teeth. Only then did Kevin relax his grip on the man's crippled arm. Kyle Thompson was standing behind him at that moment. He could only feel a bone-piercing chill rise from his foot to his forehead. If Kevin had reacted even just a fraction slower a few moments ago, both of them would be dead right now. The man responsible for the assassination attempt was now lying on the ground and continuously letting out an agonizing wail. He'd never thought that with his combat skills, there would come a day when his hands and feet would be easily crippled by his opponent. But when he saw Kevin's face clearly, the fear in his heart instantly overwhelmed any pain that he was feeling at the moment. It was as if he'd seen a ghost. He started crawling desperately, using his uninjured arm and leg as he attempted to escape from the place. "If you move one more step, I won't mind crippling your other leg and arm as well." Kevin looked at him harshly. Seeing Kevin's merciless expression, the man could tell that he wasn't joking. "Who are you? Why did you attack me? Who told you to do this?" Kevin didn't care about the man's injuries as he interrogated him. In the Thompsons' family mansion, Stanley Cooper was sitting on a chair while he recovered. Meanwhile, Terrence Price was holding up a cup of coffee, and his eyes seemed to be faintly troubled as he paced back and forth around the hall. Just then, Grandpa Thompson suddenly ran into the room in a hurry. "Something bad has happened. It seems that someone from the Morris family has found Kevin." "What?" Terrence quickly regained his senses and stopped in his tracks. Stanley's eyes widened in surprise as well. "Joseph just informed me that the people from the Radiants are already with him. However, before arriving at the airport, Kevin took Kyle with him to meet a mysterious man who had called him. And if his suspicions are correct, that person might be from the Morris family." "Joseph just informed me that the people from the Radiants are already with him. However, before arriving at the airport, Kevin took Kyle with him to meet a mysterious man who had called him. And if his suspicions are correct, that person might be from the Morris family." Herman Thompson hadn't panicked like this for many years. "That's impossible. How can they have gotten to St. Louis so quickly? Weren't they just in Chicago?" Stanley asked in disbelief. "It seems like our superiors have underestimated the strength of the Morris family after all these years." Terrence's expression became very despondent. His words made Stanley and Herman Thompson realize the same thing. The Morris family had a far more extensive network than any of them could have imagined. As a result, they must have already known about Kevin's whereabouts for some time, as well as the Radiance's arrival in St. Louis today. Otherwise, how could they have rushed there so quickly? "Where's Kevin right now? Is there any news of how their encounter went?" Terrence asked urgently. Before Herman Thompson could answer, a staff member suddenly rushed into the hall.
He lowered his head and said in a panic, "Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid that your grandson is in trouble. 10 minutes ago, a vehicle driving along the road near the Botanical Gardens exploded without any warning. Now we can confirm that it was the same SUV that he was driving when they left the mansion."
Did Kyle survive? When it came to his beloved grandson, Herman's expression couldn't help but change drastically as his blood pressure instantly rose at the thought of losing the sole heir of the Thompson family.
"There were eyewitnesses who claimed that the vehicle was attacked while it was moving. The police found shrapnel in the surrounding area, but there weren't any signs of casualties," the staff member anxiously reported. "Grandpa Thornton, don't worry. Kevin must have sensed the danger approaching, so he probably pulled your grandson away from the explosion in time," Stanley comforted him. Having fought against Kevin before, Stanley knew very well how strong Kevin's energy base was. He wasn't someone who could be easily killed by a surprise attack. Only upon hearing this did Herman Thompson heave a sigh of relief. As long as Kevin was with him, Kyle shouldn't be in too much danger.
"It looks like I'll have to ask my superiors to send the Reaper Squad to St. Louis,"
Terrence decided. Herman Thompson's whole body stiffened when he heard this. As the patriarch of one of the most prominent families in the Midwest, he knew a lot of things that weren't public knowledge. In this case, the government had a secret special operations team called the Reaper Squad, and its hand-picked members were all elite and distinguished warriors from the great powers. Because of this, their strength couldn't be underestimated.
"Is this matter really that serious, Mr. Price?"
Herman exhaled a long breath to release some tension from his heart.
"The Morris family is currently threatening to disrupt things, and I suspect that the Herbalist Society is also waiting for an opportunity to strike. With various other parties also looking to obtain the power pill formula from Kevin, there is no longer a situation that St. Louis can control on its own."
After Terrence finished speaking, he turned around and walked to the side of the room to make an important phone call. Stanley bit his lower lip tightly as if he still had reservations about the decision that his partner had just made. In a mansion in St. Louis, a man was staring intently at Kevin's photo. There was also a lot of information about Kevin on the table. The big ones were about him crashing the Hayes family wedding and stealing the bride in Detroit, and the small ones were about him being a useless son-in-law of the Jones family. Every detail of his life and activities had been carefully researched.
"In less than half a year, he went from a useless son-in-law to a powerful expert? Kevin Williams, you're really interesting."
The man looked at the photo with an enigmatic smile and said,
"I wonder, how long have you been playing this game?"
His words were full of confidence, as if everything was under his control.
"Boss, our mission failed and our assassin was killed," the man's aide slowly walked up and reported.
In fact, the assassin who had been tasked with getting rid of Kevin had a listening device on him, so they had heard his entire encounter with Kevin on the rooftop.
"As expected."
The boss wasn't very surprised by this. Instead, he slowly instructed them.
"Inform our people in St. Louis to keep a close watch on Kevin's every move."
"Yes, boss. Also, a representative from the Huxley family called again. Their patriarch is hoping that we can send some of our men to help them."
When the aide spoke, his tone didn't change much. If there were other people present, they would definitely feel extremely uncomfortable.
"Virgil Huxley is a man with great ambition but lacking in ability. Even if we were willing to help him, we wouldn't be able to make much of a difference."
The boss put down the photo he was holding in his hand and lit up a cigar, which revealed part of his resolute face.
"And what should we do, boss?"
The aide asked him with some doubt.
"Call them back and tell them that we don't have enough manpower in St. Louis at the moment, so we're unable to help them."
The boss took a deep breath and exhaled the smoke ring that gradually dissipated in the air. Kevin wiped the bloodstains on his hands and slowly walked down from the rooftop. Kyle Thompson followed closely behind him with a lingering fear. He even felt that his feet were slightly shaking while he walked. Kevin had used almost inhumane means just now to force the assassin to talk and find out what he wanted to know before ultimately ending the man's life. This was the first time Kyle had witnessed such a bloody scene in his life. He would never forget the frightened look in the assassin's eyes just before he died. "If you don't have the courage, I advise you to stop following me around." Kevin clearly sensed this and spoke to Kyle without turning his head. "Go back home and be a normal person for the rest of your life. As the sole descendant of the Thompson family, you already have an abundance of money and status that others can only dream about in their lifetime." "Mr. Williams, I'm not afraid." Kyle clenched his fists and insisted weakly. "This isn't a joke, Kyle. As your mentor, I'm concerned about your long-term safety and well-being. This path that I'm on is much tougher than you can imagine, and the enemies that I'm about to face are all terrifyingly powerful." Kevin suddenly stopped in his tracks and raised his head to look at the sun on the horizon. From his angle, he could see the numerous tall buildings in St. Louis. Kevin understood that the real game had just begun. All of his hidden enemies had already prepared huge nets, one after another, ready to kill him at any time. And at this point, Kevin had already taken the lives of too many people. Consequently, he didn't want to drag Kyle Thompson into any of this.